A terrifying new development is breaking tonight in the case of the missing Nancy Guthrie. Make sure you are subscribed right now and click that notification bell. Activate every single alert, because what the experts have begun to say over the last 48 hours is the one thing none of us ever wanted to confront. It's the awful question that investigators must eventually confront in every protracted missing person investigation, the very question families plead with journalists to avoid. It is the question that no one involved in the public discussion was willing to say out loud until this very moment: is there any chance Nancy Guthrie is still alive? This isn't just a theory or a heartless piece of speculation, but a forensic reality that law enforcement and medical professionals are finally facing head-on. The answer to that question now dictates every single choice made by this investigation as it moves forward. Here is what the past 48 hours have made painfully clear: the cadaver dogs have been put on standby. Nancy's own sleep specialist revealed she was at an incredibly high risk for a deadly heart attack the instant she was abducted. The FBI's main command center has been relocated from Tucson to Phoenix, and a signal detection unit was sent into the border desert not to find someone who was kidnapped. But according to official law enforcement sources, it was sent to search for human remains. And Savannah Guthrie herself, in a moment of soul-crushing public candor, admitted that her own mother might already be lost. Tonight, we intend to do exactly what any responsible journalist on this story must ultimately do. We're going to pose the most difficult question of all. And we will guide you step by step through what the physical evidence, the expert analysis, and the medical facts suggest as an answer. So let's begin where any truthful examination of this case must now begin. That moment was when the entire tone of the search effort changed, because for the initial several weeks, this operation proceeded with the frantic pace of a rescue mission. There were hundreds of FBI agents on the ground, a 24-hour command post operating out of Tucson, and cadaver dogs methodically combing the desert. Helicopters were constantly circling the Catalina foothills using Bluetooth signal sniffers to try and catch a ping from the pacemaker belonging to Nancy Guthrie. The entire atmosphere of those first days was one of people desperately looking for a person they believed to be alive. It was urgent and relentless, a desperate race against a clock that was ticking down by the hour, and then everything shifted. The FBI recalled the majority of its Tucson-based agents, the command center was moved from Tucson up to Phoenix, and the huge visible search operation that characterized the first weeks quietly shrank into a smaller, more specialized task force. When the press questioned Sheriff Chris Nanos about the search dogs, which were seen everywhere in the initial weeks before vanishing from the operation, he gave a very deliberate response. He stated that they remain on call for any future need, available if needed. That is absolutely not the phrasing someone uses when they fully expect to require those dogs to find a living person anytime soon. And after that, Nanos stated one more thing that brought the country to a standstill. When asked point-blank if Nancy Guthrie was still alive, he replied, "Anything is possible." He didn't say we have faith she is alive, or our information strongly indicates she's alive. He said anything is possible, a statement from the same sheriff who just 2 weeks prior had confidently and publicly declared his belief that Nancy was still out there somewhere. That simple phrase represented a monumental change, so now let's discuss CNN's chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst, John Miller. Miller is far more than a commentator, and he isn't some pundit just delivering hot takes for the cameras. He's a former high-ranking official with the New York Police Department, a past director of intelligence and counterterrorism for the NYPD, and he is one of the most trusted analytical minds in the field of American law enforcement journalism. When Miller finally confronted the question of her fate in a one-month retrospective piece, he structured his analysis with a precision that demands to be heard in its entirety. He noted that the central question is whether Nancy Guthrie is alive because a living victim injects a powerful sense of urgency into the case. That feeling of a life hanging in the balance is what keeps an investigation moving at an incredibly rapid pace. In contrast, when you have a victim that you know or at least suspect is likely deceased, the inquiry can afford to slow down and in fact grow even more meticulous, giving you far more time to pursue complex lines of inquiry that pay off in the long run. You have to read between those lines very carefully because Miller was not pronouncing Nancy dead. He was laying out the investigative framework that is controlling every single decision being made at this very moment. If she's alive, the speed is frantic and the urgency is absolute. Every available asset is thrown into the effort in real time. But if she's gone, the pace shifts to become systematic, more deliberate, and more forensically detailed. It's the type of slow burn investigation designed to build an ironclad case that can withstand the scrutiny of a prosecution. The way this investigation is currently postured, with the reduction from hundreds of agents to a specialized task force, and the pivot from active searching to intelligence analysis, aligns perfectly with Miller's second scenario. This shift doesn't imply that investigators have thrown in the towel. It suggests they may have simply changed their objective. But the most heart-wrenching piece of public evidence on this topic came directly from Savannah Guthrie on social media in an unfiltered and profoundly intimate message to the public. Savannah admitted something that no child ever wants to contemplate about a missing parent. She acknowledged that her mother might already be gone. She then continued writing, "If she is in heaven with loved ones who have passed, then we will accept it. But her family still needs answers. So just process that single statement, a daughter publicly steeling herself for the very real possibility that her mother is no longer living. Hope was a luxury they could no longer afford. Reality had become a brutal thing. Indeed, former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe revealed the grim subtext of such public statements and what they signal about discussions held in secret. He explained to CNN how the Guthrie family's official narrative was meticulously crafted from the very start with guidance from the FBI's top crisis negotiators and hostage specialists. Every single syllable, spoken publicly, he emphasized was polished and perfected with the aid of FBI professionals. If Savannah's concession that her mother might be dead was indeed part of that directed FBI messaging, it means investigators were bracing the family for the worst, something they only do when their own bleak assessment has shifted dramatically. This brings us to the medical experts, because Nancy Guthrie's survival after the events of February 1st isn't a matter of emotion, it's a cold question of physiology. The answers provided by doctors and specialists are profoundly disturbing, and sleep expert Pat Burns spoke on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. Grace would explain why. He broke down the precise sequence of events that investigators suspect took place. Nancy Guthrie was violently roused from her bed in the dead of night at roughly 2 a.m. before being dragged from her house. He explained a phenomenon called sleep inertia, noting that at 2 a.m., she would have been in either a profound deep sleep or what is known as REM sleep. Waking from a deep sleep would leave her utterly disoriented, a fact, he said, gave me immediate cause for concern. Studies clearly show that elderly individuals, even those without pre-existing heart issues, face a significant risk of cardiac arrest when abruptly awoken from deep sleep. Then Byrne highlighted the detail that overshadowed everything else. Nancy Guthrie didn't just have the heart of an average elderly person. She relied on a pacemaker, a device implanted inside her chest, because her heart was incapable of dependably beating on its own. Barnes explained that the cocktail of a violent awakening, the confusion from sleep inertia, and the shock of a physical abduction meant that for an 84-year-old woman with a documented cardiac history, she faced an immense risk of a fatal heart event right after being taken. Not days later, not after weeks of being held captive, but in the terrifying opening minutes. Dr. Srihari S. Aknaidu, a board-certified cardiologist and a medical professor at New York Medical College, lent his clinical expertise to this terrifying assessment. Dr. Naidu clarified that pacemakers are generally implanted in older patients who suffer from bradycardia, which is a dangerously slow heart rate that requires electronic stimulation just to function. He stated that for a patient of Nancy's age with her condition, a sudden and violent shock to her system would have grave cardiac repercussions. Her heart, already reliant on a machine to regulate its beat, was suddenly pushed into a state of extreme physiological duress. The system is flooded with adrenaline, blood pressure skyrockets, and the heart starts to race. A healthy younger individual can handle this because their heart has the surplus capacity to withstand the shock. In an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker, that safety net simply does not exist. The cardiac danger isn't a theory, it's a certainty. There was another piece of physical evidence from the scene itself, which forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden analyzed regarding the blood found on Nancy Guthrie's porch. The blood confirmed to be Nancy's by DNA wasn't just a smear or a splatter pattern, it was droplets with distinctly pale centers. Batten identified this unique pattern as characteristic of blood originating from the nose or mouth because it gets mixed with air. Blood from the nose or mouth, not from a simple cut on the hand or a scrape on the knee, but from her face. Batting determined the evidence pointed directly to a powerful blow to her face or a staggering fall forward. It was the type of impact that would cause someone to bleed from the nose or mouth in drops onto a hard surface. An 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker jolted from sleep, possibly struck or shoved down, and bleeding from her face before she was even off the property. Her medication was left behind, a detail often noted in news reports as adding urgency, but it warrants a much closer look for what it means about her chances of survival. This is arguably one of the most critical pieces of information we have. Nancy Guthrie depended on daily medication for her heart condition. Sheriff Nanos explicitly stated this, confirming she needed it just to live. Yet her pills were found on her kitchen counter by investigators. She was taken without them. How long could an 84-year-old, totally dependent on a pacemaker, last without her essential daily heart medication? Publicly, medical professionals have been reluctant to give a precise timeline, as they lack her specific prescription details. But the general clinical outlook for elderly patients who need vital cardiac medication is absolutely grim, as missing one dose can throw the heart's delicate rhythm into chaos. Missing several doses over days for a person already under immense physical stress completely rewrites the math on their survival. It's not a question of months or weeks, it becomes a matter of mere days then the signal sniffer arrived. It was the one shocking detail that tore through the investigation's carefully crafted public statements, exposing the grim reality of what they were searching for. Ashley Banfield delivered the report on Drop Dead Serious, citing her own law enforcement sources. She confirmed the Puma County Sheriff's Department had enlisted a partner agency to use a highly specialized detection grid in the desert. The search was focused in Santa Cruz County near Rio Rico, the same vicinity where an initial person of interest who was later cleared had been stopped. The tool they deployed was a signal sniffer, a device engineered to hunt for Bluetooth signals in the wilderness. While the official story was a search for Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker, Banfield's contacts revealed what authorities truly hoped that signal would pinpoint. They weren't seeking a living victim inside a building or a vehicle. They were searching for a body in the desolate landscape. Cadaver dogs had already been utilized, and now this signal detector was being deployed across the wide open desert. The entire operational posture, from the tech they chose to the terrain they targeted, and the language of the sources screamed, "Recovery, not rescue." However, this is precisely where the conversation demands careful handling, because a powerful counterargument exists, and it is not easily dismissed. Sheriff Chris Nanos has never declared Nancy Guthrie to be deceased. He has never publicly adopted the language of a homicide case. In fact, during one of his most unguarded interviews, when a Fox 10 reporter pressed him on Nancy's survival, his answer was one that must be taken at face value. He stated, "You have no proof, nobody does, that she's not alive. I'm going to have that faith. Sometimes that hope is all we have." And such a statement from him carries immense weight. It's weighty not as the words of a man in denial, but as the declaration of an official who is limited in what he can publicly say and who knows that no body means no proof. In the eyes of the law and the investigation, Nancy Guthrie is classified as missing, not dead, simple as missing. This distinction is critically important for the case. The family and the public, and CNN's John Miller, affirmed the investigation is anything but cold. He was explicit about it. This is nowhere near a cold case. There is still plenty of science that is out that hasn't come back yet. There are still investigators working leads that they're not finished with. Miller noted that if the same discussion were happening 18 months from now, it might be a cold case. But the present situation is profoundly opaque. Opaque, yes, but not closed, and definitely not abandoned. Just opaque, and then there is the historical precedent of kidnapped victim survival. Elizabeth Smart was taken from her Salt Lake City home at age 14 in June of 2002. She was held for 9 months. She was discovered alive, and J.C. DeGard was abducted in California at 11 years old in 1991. She was held for 18 years. She was also found alive. In both of these cases, the public had long abandoned hope, and law enforcement had privately altered their assumptions and resources. In both of those situations, they were wrong. Kidnapped victims do survive captivity when a motive exists to keep them alive. And in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, a very clear motive is present: the ransom notes. Numerous media organizations got messages demanding millions of dollars be paid in Bitcoin. The notes contain specific correct details about Nancy known only by someone with first-hand knowledge of her abduction. This included a fact about her Apple Watch's location that was not public information at that time. If an individual has Nancy Guthrie and truly plans to collect a ransom, her survival is in their best interest. A live hostage provides his leverage, while a dead one is only evidence. As former FBI hostage negotiator Rich Frankel stated directly, what you're hoping for is that the hostage taker responds back that they're still communicating, that there's still a transaction to be negotiated. The ransom notes have never been positively authenticated, but crucially, they have never been definitively proven to be fake. And as long as that uncertainty persists, so does the chance that Nancy is still alive. The matter of her medical survival also has a compelling counterpoint that must be acknowledged. Her pacemaker data went silent at 2:28 a.m. That signal was lost not due to a device malfunction, but because the Bluetooth link between her pacemaker and phone was severed by physical distance. The pacemaker is a surgically implanted device, and it does not need a phone connection to operate. It requires no link to regulate Nancy's heartbeat. It simply continues to perform its duty, whether or not it sends data to a monitoring application. If Nancy were moved from her house even forcefully and under great strain, that pacemaker would have continued to regulate her cardiac rhythm. It was still functioning perfectly. What failed was the signal, not the patient. Her need for medication presents a much graver concern, but even heart patients who skip doses don't always suffer an immediate fatal complication. The timeline for how quickly a person's health declines is dependent on the medication dosage and their individual physiology. The only truthful medical response is that we simply cannot know how long she might survive. No expert outside of her own personal doctors could. So what does the totality of the expert analysis actually conclude? It concludes that at 6 weeks with no proof she is alive, no confirmed FBI ransom communication, and no access to her medication, the odds of her survival diminish every single day. Publicly, the specialists have abandoned all talk of rescue, citing the particular physiological dangers she faces. The forensic community's unified opinion was bluntly summarized by IB Times UK. While hope may be fading, they never said it was extinguished entirely, and that narrow gap between fading and gone is precisely where this case currently resides. It resides there because the FBI remains on the job and the genetic genealogy analysis continues to run its course. Because the complex DNA mixture found at the scene awaits full separation and a complete profile. Because the compromised utility box is undergoing intense scrutiny, and the surveillance footage from January 11th is being meticulously compared with other local recordings. Because hidden on a server, a doorbell camera, or in a cell tower log, there is a clue that holds the solution to the one question every single expert is asking: what happened to Nancy Guthrie? The question isn't just about who abducted her, but everything that transpired afterward. At Tooth Medical Center, clinical psychologist Emily Mellon explained to News Nation the ordeal families endure when a relative vanishes without a trace. She noted that while losing someone is always horrific, the disappearance of a person leaves behind a painful void of unresolved issues and agonizing questions. She detailed the unique agony that comes with the uncertainty of a missing person case, the paralysis of being unable to mourn, unable to recover, and unable to look to the future, all because that single unanswered question overshadows all else. Savannah Guthrie articulated this feeling firsthand, sharing a moment with her Today colleagues that was so visceral it went beyond the medium of television. "I needed you to understand that I am not defeated, that my hope remains that I am still who I am. I can't say what form that will take, but it will continue on. Done. I cannot predict the person I will become. Here is a daughter trapped by the case's most difficult question, living in limbo, yet remaining upright and full of hope." As of now, the most agonizing question in the Nancy Guthrie investigation remains completely unresolved. While specialists outlined the physiological factors and former agents detailed the logical progression of the search, the cadaver dogs have since been withdrawn. A device to track signals has been utilized, the FBI has relocated its command center, and yet there has been no discovery. No evidence of her death has surfaced, and no one has advised the family to arrange for a memorial. This remains an active case while DNA evidence is still undergoing analysis. Investigators are now widening their timeline to include earlier dates while also intensifying their forensic examinations. Without definitive proof pointing in either direction, the sole truthful response to this difficult question is the one offered by Sheriff Nanos. There is no evidence that she is not still alive. Occasionally, hope is the only thing we can hold on to, and occasionally that hope is sufficient. Should you possess any information whatsoever regarding the Nancy Guthrie investigation, we urge you to contact 1-800-CALL-FBI immediately. $1.2 million is waiting for the tip that brings Nancy home or provides her family the answers they deserve. Subscribe to this channel, click that notification bell, and activate all alerts, because when this case cracks open, and it will crack open, you need to be here when it does. Every missing person story carries more than mystery. It carries a lesson about the value of human life and the power of community. When someone disappears, the headlines often focus on questions. What happened? Where are they? Are they still alive? But behind every question is a family living through unimaginable uncertainty. Parents, siblings, and friends wake up every day, hoping for news, holding on to even the smallest possibility that their loved one will return. Stories like this remind us that safety and awareness matter. We often move through our busy lives assuming everything will always be fine. Yet situations like these show how important it is to look out for one another, friends checking on friends' neighbors, paying attention, and communities speaking up when something seems wrong. At the same time, these cases teach us empathy. It's easy to treat tragedies as distant news stories, but every name in the headlines represents a real person with dreams, memories, and people who love them deeply. The greatest lesson is simple but powerful: human lives matter, and compassion matters even more. When communities stay alert, support families in pain, and refuse to forget those who are missing, hope continues to exist even in the darkest moments.